Yeah, hello. Today I want to talk a bit about greenhouse gas emission data as it was introduced. And yeah, of course, we talk about that because we have this issue called climate change. And climate change has reasons, it has causes. There are places where these greenhouses that warm the planet come from. For example, this is a power plant, and this is the power plant in Hamburg-Tiefstack. It is the largest source of CO2 emissions in this city. And if you put too much CO2 in the air, then you end up with things like on the right. This was the flood in last year. And we see more extreme weather events caused by climate change. And yeah, it's good to better understand where that comes from. Now, a little disclaimer, I don't think climate change is primarily an information problem, but of course, better understanding the problem is always helpful if you want to deal with it. So today I want to talk about greenhouse gas emission data, data sources, databases, and some of the strange experiences I made when I tried to deal with this. There's something called the UNFCCC, which is basically within the United Nations, the part that deals with climate diplomacy. They organize the COP conferences, the international climate conferences. The success of that is not so great, but that's not the topic today. But they also have a role in collecting data about climate change and about emissions from its member countries, which are all the countries in the world. So if you go to their webpage and if you find the right subpage, which is not that easy, you can get downloads from reports from countries to the UN about the emissions from these countries. So this is data about country-level emissions. It's not about a single power plant, but it's something like this industry in Germany emits that much CO2 or also other gases. And the most relevant part here are the so-called common reporting tables. These are Excel tables. This is how it looks like. I think you've seen Excel tables before. That's LibreOffice. I don't have Excel. So I think maybe it's a bit hard to read, but you have here various industries. Like you can see what is the energy industry in this country. This is for Germany, emitting in CO2, in methane, other gases. And it's quite detailed. You can have quite a detailed breakdown on various sectors. What can we do with this data? Let's say you ask yourself a question like that. What are the N2O emissions of caprolactam production in different countries? I'm not sure how many of you ask themselves questions like that. I do that. Maybe some of you don't even understand what that question means. N2O is the third most important greenhouse gas. It's also kind of known as laughing gas. It's the thing, if you inhale it, you get a funny voice. But it's also a very powerful greenhouse gas. And caprolactam is a chemical that is used to make certain types of plastics, particularly also fibers that are used for synthetic clothing. So I would assume that my T-shirt was made from caprolactam. And this production of this chemical creates N2O, and this is emitted. And the interesting thing about that is that it is very cheap to avoid. And if you want to read more about that, I have a link here, and the slides are also online, so you don't have to write down that link if you want to read more about that. Okay, so the United Nations, they have a data interface with an API. So we could use that data interface to get this information. Unfortunately, it's no longer updated. The last data in there is from 2021. And after that, and what I heard from them is they basically, at some point, they didn't have the funding to add the new data to that data interface anymore. Yeah, so the Excel tables is all we got. I also learned from someone who seemed to be familiar with these things that they have this data in JSON format, but they don't publish that because they have at some point decided that they will publish the tables, but they don't have a decision to publish these JSON files. And to get to such a decision, that would be a consensus between all the countries, and that's really difficult. And therefore, they say they are not able to publish these JSON files. They only have a decision to publish the tables, so it's the only thing we got. There are 104 countries that currently have provided this data. It's one zip file per country. Within that zip file, there's one Excel file for each year where this data is available. And I don't know about you, I am not motivated to click on 104 download links, then you go to another page, and then you can select the right file, and that's no fun, right? And if you're the kind of person that goes to CCC, maybe you think, I want to automate this. It cannot be too difficult. A quick shell script or Python script or whatever your favorite scripting language is, that should be doable. And yeah, that's what I tried. And I started, of course, you use something like curl, and then you download the overview web page. And then what you get is not a web page, not HTML. It's an empty page that appears to try to load some JavaScript. It says encapsula resource here. Encapsula is a security firewall. So yeah, they prevent you from automatically downloading that data with a security firewall because it's very dangerous when people download that data automatically. That has to be prevented. Yeah. And you might say, OK, just change the user agent or something. No, it's not that easy. They seem to do some sophisticated fingerprinting. And I was not easily able to circumvent that. Now, the question is, of course, why are they doing that? And I asked them. I didn't get an answer. Like, I sent them an email with multiple questions. They sent me answers to all the other questions, but my main question was, why are you doing this? And they didn't answer. And then I asked again, why are you doing this? And they didn't answer. So they don't seem to want to tell me why they're doing this. Maybe it's just they have bought the security firewall and don't know how to configure it. I don't know. But yeah, I eventually managed to download all these files. I used Selenium, which is something where you're basically programming a browser and then your script clicks the things in the browser. It's super annoying to use, but it works. And if you want that data, I would suggest that you don't do that because it's super annoying. You can download the data now from me. Because I'm providing files where you have one file where all the data for 1 year is, and I don't have a security firewall to stop you from doing that. About our question with the caprolactam emissions, that's how it looks like. And of course, that looks a bit confusing, but there's an interesting story here. And that's you see this black line that is going down very rapidly. And I mean, that's really what we want to see when we talk about climate change and emissions, right? Emissions going down rapidly. Unfortunately, it doesn't happen very often, but if you look at some specific sectors, sometimes good things happen. So this is the European Union, and this is, of course, composed of all the European countries. You can see two other lines, the orange one and the blue one, that are also going down. These are the Netherlands and Belgium. And the reason here is that there are two very large factories for this chemical in the Netherlands and Belgium, and they have installed technology to filter these emissions in recent years, and therefore they've been going down rapidly. The one in the Netherlands will shut down soon due to market circumstances, which is a bit unfortunate. They just improved their operations to be much more climate friendly, and now they have to shut down. But yeah. So, I mean, my real message here is that there are interesting stories in that data. Something has been happening here, and in this case, it's a good thing. These companies have installed technology to avoid these emissions, and they are going down rapidly. Okay, now that was country-level emission data. But what if we want information about single factories, single power plants, specific emission sources? And there is something called the Kiev Protocol on Pollutant Release and Transfer Registers. This was signed in 2003. It's an international treaty, although most of the signing countries are European countries, so it's mostly a European thing. But in this international treaty, the signing countries agreed that they will provide public registers about the industries in their countries and what pollutants they are releasing into the environment. That's a good thing, right? It's transparency around the status of the environment and what's happening to it. And in the European Union, they have implemented this because the European Union has signed this treaty, and there's the European Industrial Emissions Portal, which is operated by the European Environmental Agency. And there you can access the data for the European Union and also some other countries. And you can also download it, and there's a user-friendly CSV file. That's how they call it. That's nice. It's under a Creative Commons attribution license, which also means we can use it without worrying too much about copyright. We only have to cite our source when we use that data. So what I did is I put that into a database, and I have released some scripts that can help you do that too. So here's a GitHub repository which basically you can build a Docker container that will provide a SQL interface and also a web PHP-MyAdmin interface. I guess the more technical people will know what that means. If you don't know what that means, don't worry. Most of the talk you can still follow. And I want to quickly show you that. So here is my local database with this data. It's a table, and you have an entry for each year and pollutant and factory. And then, for example, we can do a search, and let's take the year 2023, which is, I think, the latest where data is available. Then we want to know about CO2, which is, of course, the most important greenhouse gas. And let's check what's going on in the city of Hamburg. Yep. And it's already sorted here. So we can see, as I told you earlier, the power plant Hamburg-Tiefstack is the largest CO2 emission source in Hamburg. Then the next one is a refinery. Then there are 2 waste incinerators, and there's another waste incinerator and another one. That's maybe interesting. I think many people don't know that, but waste incineration is a really large source of CO2 emissions. So among the largest emission sources in Hamburg, 4 are waste incinerators. That's maybe an interesting fact. There's also one factory missing here, and I'll get to that later. This is basically the reason why I'm giving this talk. This is a ferrosilicon plant operated by the company Elkem in Iceland. You don't really have to understand what that means. Ferrosilicon is a chemical which has both iron and silicon in it, and producing it causes CO2 emissions. because they use coal and Iceland is not in the European Union, but they are in the European Economic Area, which is abbreviated EEA, just like the European Environmental Agency. That's why I'm not using these abbreviations, because you will be totally confused. And that basically means they are not part of the European Union, but they have very close ties with the European Union, and they have also adopted many regulations from the European Union, and therefore they have also adopted this regulation about these pollutant registers, and their data is also in the European Industrial Emissions Portal. Okay, so I already had my SQL table back when so at some point I was researching for a story about Iceland where I wanted to know what the CO2 emission sources in Iceland are, and I already had my database, so I looked them up, and this is how you would do that with raw SQL. So yeah, we select the year and the releases. That means just how much from this table, where the pollutant is CO2, country Iceland, and the name, we don't really know how it's written in the database, so we just can make like lchem %, which is like a wildcard character, and we want to order it by the year, because that makes it more easy to understand what's going on. And then it looks like this. And this is where I thought, okay, something is really strange here. So in 2014 and all the earlier years, I've just shortened it to 10 years. Earlier years have similar values. You have values that are like 300, 400 million kilograms. It's in kilograms because there are other pollutants that have much smaller values in the same database, so they use kilograms. That sounds about right for a factory like that. I mean, I do this quite regularly. I have a rough feeling what such factories emit. Then for 3 years, you have no emissions at all. I have not heard that this factory was shut down in those years. I mean, possible, but if so, there were no media reports about it or anything. But then in 2018, we have data again, but it's much, much smaller. Sounds good, right? They have reduced their emissions almost by a factor of 1,000. That would be great. And then again by a factor of 1,000, so now we're down by a factor of 1,000,000. But then they grow again. But I'm not aware of any technology that could do that, and if such a technology existed, I would probably have heard about it. So I don't think that is correct. And I looked at other places in Iceland, other factories. This is an aluminum plant. This is the largest factory in Iceland at all, and also the largest CO2 emitter. And you see something very similar. I mean, we don't have missing data here, but at some point it just drops by around a factor of 1,000. And I know there is technology in aluminum where we might be able to do that, but I'm not aware that they are using that in Iceland. Yeah. I also don't think that is correct. And this one had me scratching my head. So there's another aluminum factory, and they reported 62 tons of SF6 emissions. SF6 is the most powerful greenhouse gas at all, but only in 2011, like for no other year. I mean, SF6 is primarily used in electric switchgear, and aluminum plants use a lot of electricity, so they will probably have some SF6 there. But if they have emitted 62 tons in 1 year and nothing in any other years, it could be that there was an accident. I have not found any reports about that. But it would be very extreme, like 62 tons, that is to give you a perspective, if you convert that to how much CO2 that would equate to, it's 1.5 million tons, and that is roughly half of the total emissions of Iceland. So that would have shot up the emissions of Iceland by around 50%. I think someone would have heard about that and made it public if that happened. So yeah, I think something is not right with this emission reporting in Iceland. So I contacted the European Environmental Agency, and that was back in June, because they are the ones that are publishing this data on their webpage. And yeah, they said they will look into it, they will contact the Icelandic data reporter, and then some months later asked, what about this? I haven't heard back from you. And then even later they answered me, that was in September. We referred the matter to the Icelandic data reporter for clarification. Unfortunately, despite our follow-up, we have not received any further information from their side. With this, we will close the present inquiry. So they said, yeah, we've asked in Iceland and they haven't answered, and then nothing we can do. I wasn't really satisfied with that answer. And then I asked again, like I said, okay, aren't these like laws, and aren't you supposed to follow laws? And is there who is responsible to enforce these laws? And they said, yeah, that would be the European Commission. And yeah, so I contacted the European Commission, and the European Commission said, yeah, I should ask the European Environmental Agency. Yeah, then I said, yeah, I already did that, and they said, I should ask you, and yeah, they said they will look into it. I have not received an explanation until today. Yeah. Okay. There is something called the European Emission Trading System, which many of you will probably know. This is kind of a key pillar of EU climate policy, which is if you release CO2 into the air within Europe under certain conditions, it's very complicated, then you have to buy emission certificates. Most of the companies get most of them for free due to protect them from international competition, and there are many exceptions and many special rules, and it's really complicated. But the basic idea is you pay for your emissions. So this is about money. And you may wonder if there's data where suddenly emissions drop and it's not really plausible and they have to pay for that. Isn't that kind of a problem? It turns out that this emission trading system, they are using another data set, which is also public. It's called the Union Registry. Excel tables again, but okay, we can deal with that. And it's also Creative Commons licensed. So now we have two data sources for CO2 emissions. There are a few issues, like one of them includes biogenic CO2, the other doesn't, and there are sometimes other greenhouse gases that are converted, so you have to know a few things to compare them. But it's possible to compare them, and that would be, of course, an obvious thing to do. If we have strange data and we have two data sources, we can compare them. However, there's no such thing as a shared identifier. Like, it's not that the company name is always written in the same way, and there's also not any ID where you can link these two databases. But at this point, I got in touch with a scientist, Leonard Stimpfle from University in Ghent in Belgium, and he was basically also working on the same thing I was working on. He looked at these databases, he found some of the very same things and also others that he told me about. And he said, yeah, we're just working on a linking table where we can connect these two databases. Because I had also, of course, thought about that. How could I do that? Could I match this? But they did the work for me. And they have published that now. So now we have a way to link these two data sources. Also Creative Commons licensed, so that's great. Yeah, so back to our ferrosilicon plant in Iceland. If you look at these two different databases, then on the left you have the emission trading system, and on the right you have the industrial emissions database. The column on the left looks much more plausible. The emissions are always roughly around 400,000 tons. That sounds believable. And yeah, we may guess what the problem here is, because the data is always pretty much exactly a factor of 1,000 too low. In this one line, it's about 1 million too low. I guess they entered the wrong unit there. So they probably entered tons, and in one case kilotons, where they should have entered kilograms. Yeah. This aluminium plant, it looks very similar. Here the numbers diverge a bit, and the reason for that is that aluminium plants have PFC emissions, and they are converted into CO2 equivalent, but you don't get all the information to do that calculation. Therefore, I couldn't do that, because there are different types of PFCs, and you convert them in different ways, but you only get a value for the total of them. But it doesn't really matter, because the difference is not that large. So again, on the left side, you have something that looks very believable. The emissions are always roughly in the same range. That seems believable, that the same factory would have the same emissions usually. And I guess it's the same issue, that these numbers, they have entered them in the wrong unit. So it appears this data from the emission trading system is usually more reliable. Also, maybe not surprising, because this emission trading system, it's about money. And in this industrial emissions portal, it's only about transparency. That's maybe a bit sad, but it seems like a plausible reason why it's like that. But it's not just in Iceland where emission data sometimes looks odd. This is a steel plant in France, in Dunkirk. And this is how their emissions look. So these are the CO2 emissions from these two data sources. And of course, they should be the same. It doesn't matter which database we look at, their CO2 emissions in a certain year should be the same. And in many years, they are roughly the same. I mean, maybe some rounding issues, but I would say 2012 and everything before that looks kind of right, and 2018 and after that also looks kind of right, but in between they are different. And to this day, I don't know what's going on here. The European Commission told me they know about this, but that was basically the only thing they told me about it. But that 2018 and continuing, it's okay again, so yeah. I want to point out that the lower line is the line that is about money. So I would say it's very important to understand which line here is the correct one. But I don't know, unfortunately. Yeah. ArcelorMittal, the company operating that steel plant, they also have a steel plant in Hamburg. It's kind of special because it's the only so-called DRI plant, which means they use gas instead of coal, but that doesn't really matter. They have not reported any emissions to the industrial emissions portal, CO2 emissions at all, and they are definitely above the threshold where they should report. In the ETS, they have reported their emissions in split up in 3 parts of the factory, but the largest one is definitely above the threshold where they would have to report it, but this data is just missing. Yeah, this is another example. This is again in France. This is a fertilizer factory. They produce nitric acid, which also causes N2O, and then again you have to convert that N2O into CO2 equivalents, which is a bit challenging because they changed the conversion factor in 1 year because they kind of updated it to the latest science. Makes sense, but you have to consider that if you do this, if you want to do this comparison. But again, here you see for many years it looks these curves are roughly the same, but then for some years they are somehow different, and it's not clear why that is happening. This factory was in the news recently Probably some of you have read about that. It was in Spiegel, and ZDF had reported about it, so big German media. This is a factory producing SF6. SF6, as I told you earlier, is the most powerful greenhouse gas at all. It's a factory operated by the company Solvay in Bad Wimpfen, and it turned out that their emissions were 500 times that what they had reported. So they emitted around 30 tons, estimated by atmospheric measurements from scientists, and their recent reports were all around 60 kilograms. So when I heard about this, and I heard, oh, they had reported their emissions wrong, and I have this database, I will have a look at it. Looks like this, and I mean, first of all, the real value is above the building. This is all wrong. These scientists have shown they have much higher emissions. But even if you wouldn't know that, you might think something here is strange. I mean, okay, first of all, there are missing values. That is because the threshold is 50 and the other values are just slightly above 50, so that could be. But then you have, in many years, the value is exactly 60, and I don't think they have exactly the same emissions for multiple years. And then suddenly lower, and then again for multiple years. Yeah, and then I wondered, can I look if I find similar cases for that? Like data gaps and suspiciously constant emissions? Problem was I found so many of them, and I wasn't really sure what to do, because like in some cases it seems pretty clear something is wrong. Sometimes this is plausible if you have something where I don't know, there are things like a landfill where you might assume, okay, they probably have at some point estimated how much that landfill emits and assume that it's always the same because they don't add anything new. But in many cases, it looks very odd, yeah. But I've only done that very recently, so the kind of early analysis, so I also won't show you them because I'm not really sure if there's a mistake or if there's some explanation. Yeah. Of course, I also tried to contact all these companies. I have not received an explanation from any of them. Yeah, I also received no answer from the Icelandic or the French authorities that are responsible there for collecting that data. And the European Commission and the European Environmental Agency, I mean, they tend to answer to my emails, but I don't really get meaningful answers. So yeah. Oh, and there was a recent update of the data, and of course I was, yeah, data update, I will import that in my database, and I checked all the issues and they were all the same. Like nothing was corrected, and I have been in contact with them since June, so there was plenty of time to maybe correct something, but yeah. Yeah. And yeah, it's also still unclear to me what the source of these errors are. Are the companies doing it wrong? Are the national authorities doing it wrong? Or is it somewhere in the EU? Yeah, that's. And also for the cases that were not obvious unit issues where you have these diverging curves, it's unclear to me which curve is the correct one. Yeah, so to summarize, yeah, we have open data about greenhouse gas emissions from European factories. That's good. But that data contains obvious and also easily detectable errors. Like if you're a country like Iceland and your largest factory suddenly has emissions 1,000 times lower, you should be able to detect that. And it seems like both the companies and also the responsible authorities don't appear to care much to correcting these errors, and that is maybe disappointing. Yeah, yeah, thanks for listening. I think we have some time for questions. Also, I'm writing a newsletter about things like that, and I'm also occasionally trying to do talks like this, but put them on YouTube. So, yeah, you can find the links here. And if you subscribe to my newsletter now, you will later today or tomorrow get an article about this issue with the European emission databases if you want to read up on that. Yeah.
Thank you so much for the talk, Hannah. This is really interesting and concerning information. We have a couple of minutes for questions, so if you want to make your way to the mics, we will get to you presently. In the meantime, we do have a question from our signal angel. What does the internet want to know?
Yeah, the question is there data on the development of N2O emissions in relation to caprolactam production output?
I don't think so, because I think the production volume is secret. But there's a study from Öko-Institut where they looked specifically into this caprolactam N2O issue. If you can write me an email and I can send you the link.
Thank you. Maybe mic number 2.
Yes, thank you for that talk. It's very interesting, super valuable. Thank you that you're doing this. Did you compare these modern, flashy web portals like climatetrace.org and other aggregators, Our World in Data and so on? They also publish this data. It's often not super clear where it comes from, how it is aggregated. Did you compare this to official reporting? And did you see any similar things in there?
No, I recently came across something like that, but I found it very confusing from its interface. So no, I haven't.
Thought so. Thank you.
Yeah.
This might be the next step if you want to catch up after and chat. Maybe mic number 1 has a question?
Thanks for your talk and interesting and frightening data. I suppose for German data there are some German authorities who correlate this, collect this.
It's Umweltbundesamt.
Is there anybody in Germany, authorities, who should do plausibility checks and catch this? And have you contacted them?
I have. So the thing is, the German issues, I only found them very recently. And I mean, one of them I only sent them like 2 days before Christmas, so I cannot expect them to answer on that so quickly. They have promised me to get back on me in January, so yeah. And from my experience, I think the Umweltbundesamt cares a bit more about these issues than maybe the authorities in other countries. But the main thing was just that most of the German examples were very recent.
Let's do one more quick question. Mic number 3.
Do you think there's a possibility for competitors to sue because of underreporting? Because it's quite an advantage to save money?
If you underreport for the ETS, then I'm pretty sure there is. I'm not sure if anyone has done that, because most of the errors seem to be in this reporting-only database. I'm not a lawyer. It's an interesting question. Even if it's just the transparency reporting, you could say they are lying about their emissions. That could be, but yeah. If they are lawyers, you should think about that.
Thank you so much. Unfortunately, we do not have enough time in our Q&A section to answer all the remaining questions. But you're in luck, because Hanno is a Congress veteran, and I'm pretty sure open to chatting with you afterwards. Where can people grab you afterwards, Hanno?
Maybe we go out there and can have a talk there.
So very organic chat right after. And of course, don't forget to subscribe to the Hanno's newsletter and get all new information later today. So thank you so much for the talk. Please give Hanno a warm round of applause.